So a huge story breaking in the last couple of minutes, or certainly it's a story that could get much, much, much bigger over the course of the next few weeks, months, I don't know, but it's the story, I suppose, that people have been waiting for ever since the guy retired or left WWE back in 2014, and that is a possible in-ring professional wrestling return for former WWE superstar, former WWE champion, one of the biggest pro wrestlers of the past decade, that being CM Punk. Fightful Select, which of course is their Patreon service, Sean Ross Sapp of Fightful has just broken this story in the last couple of minutes or so, and it's about one of the biggest stars in pro wrestling in the last, as I mentioned, 10, 20, however many years. CM Punk could be headed back to a pro wrestling ring if all goes well, because according to Fightful, according to sources close to Fightful, CM Punk, the former WWE champion, has been in ongoing talks for an in-ring return. Now, Fightful Select are reporting that they learned last week that CM Punk has been in talks to make a return to pro wrestling as an active in-ring performer. That must be stated as well. This isn't a return to pro wrestling of being a general manager, a commentator, an on-screen figure. No, this is CM Punk returning to pro wrestling as an in-ring performer, with sources indicating to Fightful that AEW is the most likely landing point for CM Punk with regards to this pro wrestling in-ring return. AEW is the most likely destination. Now, Fightful have stressed in the entirety of this report here that we are going to go through, Fightful have stressed that they have no confirmation of a contract officially being signed between AEW and CM Punk, a timetable of when CM Punk could theoretically come in to AEW, a set return date, a set return event for CM Punk, or any creative plans, opponents, storylines, etc. between CM Punk and AEW, or anything of that matter. Only that CM Punk and a company official, referring to AEW, I guess, have been having ongoing conversations about an in-ring return, specifically within an All Elite Wrestling ring. Now, obviously, within any negotiations just in general, let alone professional wrestling, nothing is ever truly confirmed until those I's are dotted and the T's are crossed, and until the deal is actually done, the contract is signed, and frankly, until the person in question, this being CM Punk, actually appears on a broadcast, on a television program inside of an AEW ring, or if it's announced on social media by the company or CM Punk themselves. Now, Fightful also go into, because this is a really lengthy report that they've released here, Fightful have also reported they have heard of other companies having interest in CM Punk coming into work since live crowds have returned, but they haven't heard of any specific offers or overtures of that matter being made towards CM Punk, apart from this speculated AEW connection that we have just spoken about. Now, Fightful also stressed, this is why I've put unconfirmed in the graphic here, Fightful have not officially confirmed this report with either CM Punk or All Elite Wrestling officials. Now, this isn't anything new, really, because if CM Punk and AEW are negotiating, hardly is CM Punk going to go to Fightful. Yes, of course I'm negotiating with AEW, and certainly AEW themselves aren't going to confirm with Fightful or Sean Ross Sapp that they're in negotiations for what would be one of the biggest professional wrestling returns of the last decade or so. It's a big deal, and they're going to keep a lot of things quiet. Now, the irony is that, and I am still going to put this up on the channel, but this video is going to come first. The irony is I just did a video. I just finished recording a video, editing a video, putting it all together about AEW and the rumors of Daniel Bryan signing with AEW, with the belief within WWE that Daniel Bryan is headed to AEW, or is at least expected to sign, or already has signed a contract with AEW. On top of that, now we're now hearing rumors that CM Punk is expected to go to AEW as well. Now, this is important what Fightful have said here. Fightful are also reporting they have been told in recent days that the senior officials, the higher-ups within WWE believe that CM Punk is indeed headed to All Elite Wrestling. Now, CM Punk wrestled his last match in January of 2014 for WWE. That was when he lost in the Royal Rumble match, was eliminated by Kane. Infamously, 24 hours later, he walked out backstage at Monday Night Raw after a backstage meeting with Vince McMahon and Triple H. CM Punk was unhappy with creative. He was hurt. He was frustrated. He decided to leave. He was released later that year. And in the years that followed, he pursued a career in mixed martial arts with the UFC, where he officially has a 0-1 record with a 1-no contest. He's also been acting in films, writing comic books. Now, in addition to mixed martial arts, Punk has worked a commentary role within the sport and, of course, as I mentioned, made his way into acting. He has kept his finger on the pulse of professional wrestling, specifically WWE. He also appeared on WWE Backstage on FS1 for approximately 6 months while that show was being broadcast on FS1. But apart from those appearances on Backstage, he has made 2 other appearances inside of a wrestling ring or involving pro wrestling since leaving WWE back in 2014, both in a very anonymous mask roles on the independent circuit. He appeared on 2 independent shows under a mask, in a full masked suit, and he did the GTS twice. Reportedly, this was going to be part of some documentary that never made it to air in the end, but those videos are out there of CM Punk hitting a GTS inside of a professional wrestling ring. Now, as I mentioned, there's a lot to get into when it comes to this story that Fightful have just broken in the course of the last 15 minutes or so. If it does pay off, and it's a massive if, I don't think anyone should look at this as confirmation CM Punk's returning to professional wrestling or confirmation CM Punk, he's all elite, he signed with AEW. That isn't what this report says. What the report says right now, and this again must be stressed here, it really must be stressed. What this report says right now is that CM Punk is in talks for an in-ring return. Again, we don't know anything else about that. All we know is that he's in talks, or has been in ongoing talks for a return to the wrestling ring. And again, when you have to look at the options available to him, he's spoken about this a couple of times, because every time CM Punk does an interview, especially if it's based around pro wrestling, he's always asked, are you ever going to return? Are you going to return to WWE? Are you interested in going to AEW? Are you interested in returning to pro wrestling? And he's never ruled it out. Initially when he first left WWE, yes, he said, I'm retired, I have no interest in going back. I think he was just very burnt out, very bitter towards WWE, and you can't blame him, you really can't. But he softened on that stance over the course of the last few years, certainly, and he's always been very open, and he kind of always gives the same answer. He says, look, if I wanted to return to the ring, it'd have to be for a lot of money, or it would have to be for still good money, but if there's a good storyline there, if there's a good story, if there's a good creative, it would take my price down significantly. He never even ruled out a return to WWE. He said, look, again, if it was the right story, if it was the right amount of money, I would consider it, because, like he said, who am I to turn down $10 million or something ridiculous? You know what I mean? And he's not going to be getting that in AEW, because, again, I think it's a different situation. But like he said, who am I to turn down a load of money? He said in regards to WWE, look, the issue would be is that there's a lot of baggage there, and there was a lot of issues there. And let's be honest, I've got to have conversations with people there like Vince McMahon, Triple H, etc., that I've yet to have. And I've got to rebuild some bridges that I don't even know can be rebuilt, that were burnt down a long time ago. So I think a lot of people have always said, could you imagine CM Punk returning to a WWE ring? You never want to rule it out, because I know it's so cliche in pro wrestling, but it truly is a never say never situation. I think that's important to state. But the idea of him going to AEW, for me, was always an interesting proposition. You have to remember as well, CM Punk negotiating with AEW isn't a new thing either. When AEW first went to TNT around 2019, in that first year of the company, there were reports that CM Punk had very informal conversations. I think CM Punk himself broke the story. Because someone in an interview asked, have you had any offers for pro wrestling? Because he was saying the irony is that everyone talks about CM Punk coming back and making returns, and that no one had really made him an offer. No one had directly approached him and said, look, do you want to come back? Do you want to do something? No one had asked him, apart from Cody Rhodes. He mentioned that Cody Rhodes had sent him a text, and that he was a bit put back by the text. He thought, well, why wouldn't you just call me? Why wouldn't you schedule a meeting? It felt very informal. It didn't feel like an offer. Reportedly, CM Punk talking about that in a public setting rubbed people in AEW the wrong way, because they felt that's not how you do business. You could have kept it private. We could have made it something more. So there was heat on almost both sides, like CM Punk going, I'm not even sure that was an offer. It didn't feel like an offer. It didn't feel very professional. On the other side of things, AEW were like, why are you airing this in public? We'd want to keep it a surprise anyway. So there was friction there for a while. But now, reportedly, CM Punk is in talks for an in-ring return. Again, we don't know who with. I think that's important to state. Fightful have not confirmed that CM Punk is in talks for an in-ring return with AEW. They have merely speculated here that AEW is the most likely landing point. I think that's not too much of a reach, considering, again, WWE, there's conversations to be held there that I don't think have been held. Other companies, you know, your Impacts, your Ring of Honors, your NWAs, your MLWs, it's just, that is not going to interest CM Punk at this point. You know, this is important as well. CM Punk's 42 years of age. This isn't CM Punk, the sprightly young guy that was on the indies or even in WWE when he left. You know, he left, 7 years ago? So he was, about 30, 35 at the time. You know, he was in his prime. He was at his peak at that point in terms of popularity and in terms of, you know, everything, physically and all that kind of stuff. So, again, you have to remember that CM Punk at 42 years of age, realistically, if he's going to do a return to the ring, it's kind of now or never. And I know people will say, well, there have been plenty of people older than that. Yeah, that's true, but I don't think CM Punk wants to be that guy that's wrestling into his late 40s, early 50s. He's always spoken about not wanting to be that guy, but I think if you look at CM Punk and look at the interviews that he's done, especially over the course of the last 2 years or so, really since he started doing that WWE backstage stuff, you can tell, not that he's got the itch back. I think he's always said that, no, not really, but he's open. He's open to doing business. And I think that, you know, once AEW realized that, and CM Punk, he's a unique guy. And I think you have to just, there are so many misconceptions around him, and maybe he can be difficult to work with or can be quite, you know, again, very direct with his conversational style and all that kind of stuff. But I think a lot of people have said, look, but once you get him sat down and you can talk business with him, he is a very reasonable guy. And look, if there's money to be made there from an AEW point of view, of course they want to make money. They want to generate buzz and they want to, you know, AEW's on a roll right now. They really are on a roll. They did over 1 million viewers last week. They're selling out Arthur Ashe Stadium in New York. I mean, what a time that would be for CM Punk to return. Arthur Ashe Stadium, their first stadium show, which is nearly sold out at this point, having CM Punk return there, that'd be massive. It would be ginormous. And I think AEW realize right now, again, with live crowds returning, with getting over 1 million viewers once again, they realize actually that there's a lot of growth ready, and there's a lot of growth, and we just need, I hate to use the rocket fuel analogy, but is CM Punk going to turn AEW Dynamite into a 2 million plus show in terms of viewership? No. But an extra 200,000, an extra 300,000, suddenly you're floating out that 1.3, 1.4 million viewers. That isn't a million miles away from Monday Night Raw. Monday Night Raw's been on the air for 28 years. Dynamite's been on the air for 2. I think they realize, actually, you know, if we get a CM Punk in, and he seems interested, if we get a Daniel Bryan in, who once again seems interested. I mentioned this to a friend of mine, and I know probably people would criticize me for this one, but and it's not the same. It's not the same. But an analogy I kind of think of is CM Punk and Daniel Bryan coming into AEW. It's like Hogan and Savage into WCW. It's not the same because they're not as big a stars and they didn't come, you know, from WWE and all that kind of stuff. But they're big names. They are big names in the modern pro wrestling day and age. You're not going to get John Cena go to AEW. You're not going to get Roman Reigns go to AEW. But in terms of the biggest stars around, Daniel Bryan and CM Punk, they both don't have a contract with WWE right now. And I think AEW, if they were wise, they would realize this isn't going to happen. That isn't going to happen again. Then it's very rare they're going to be in a situation where they can bring in both Daniel Bryan and CM Punk. That's huge. That's massive. Why wouldn't they go for that? Why wouldn't they make an offer? So the fact that CM Punk reportedly is in talks for an in-ring return, of all the stories that there have been in 2021 so far, and there have been so many in the world of pro wrestling, 2021 is a wild year here in terms of pro wrestling. Live crowds returning, you name it, all that kind of stuff. If they could see him, and they be in AEW, if AEW could convince CM Punk to make an in-ring return, and again, we don't know what the details would be, we don't know what the contract would be, we don't know how many dates, how many matches, creative, opponents, whoever. Certainly there are plenty of names on that roster that I'd be very interested in seeing. Obviously, the big one would be Punk versus Omega. But there are other names there as well. Punk versus Malachi Black. That's exciting. Punk versus Darby Allin. The Cody Rhodes, CM Punk, and Chris Jericho, I'm really careful. We've seen that. But it's the names we haven't seen before. That's what Punk said as well previously too. He said, look, if I go back to WWE, most of the guys there I have faced still. If I go to AEW, there is Kenny Omega, there is Darby Allin, there is Malachi Black. You know, those names CM Punk haven't faced off against before, and that's exciting. And even some rematches, I mentioned we've seen Punk versus Jericho and Punk versus Cody Rhodes before, but even Punk versus Bryan, just because of the history that's involved there, it would be massive. It would be absolutely massive for AEW. Now, can they pull it off? Time will tell. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, this in itself is already a big story. But if we get closer to it actually becoming a reality, it'll be one of the biggest stories of the year. So time will only tell. It's a very breaking story, an exciting story. Obviously, we'll cover it far more in depth if we get any more news about it. But what do you think about a possible CM Punk return? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I'll do my best to respond and reply to all of your comments. Really enjoy interacting with you guys, talking about AEW, WWE, Impact Wrestling, New Japan Pro Wrestling, all things pro wrestling here on the channel. So be sure to get involved in the community. Drop a comment below. All opinions are welcome. If you have enjoyed this video, please do smash a like on the like button too. Really does help us out here on YouTube. Go up the rankings and get to people's recommendation feeds if they haven't seen our videos previously. But most importantly, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to Wrestle News 365. You can do that by clicking the bottom right hand corner of the screen right now, or if you wait a few seconds, there'll be a subscribe button at the end of this video along with another video for you to watch. Thank you very much for watching, listening, streaming, or have you come across this video today, and I'll speak to you again very, very soon.
Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.